Hello. Come on in, grab seats if you're still coming in. I'm waiting for my, let's see if this is going to come up. Oh. Fantastic. Okay. Well, I assume that'll show up at some point. There we go. So my presentation title is slightly different now because, as was just mentioned, I'm actually no longer the blockchain program lead at JP Morgan as of last week. I quit. But I'm launching a company at this point, which I cannot give you any details on. But what I can say is that I completely redid all of my slides in the last week so that there is no crossover of any sort of information. But what's cool is that now I can say whatever I want. So that's great. So in thinking about what is it that I really wanted to discuss with this community, I just think it's a little crazy that I'm giving a closing keynote on blockchain at Hack in the Box. I'll be honest. I mean, blockchain wasn't even a thing like a couple years ago. And so I would assume that most people see it as this kind of strange buzzword thing. And but I have spent a lot of time going back and forth to both the InfoSec community and to C-suite in the banking industry and corporates and central banks, and also in non-InfoSec but other kind of blockchain development communities, and speaking all these different languages over the last couple of years. And I have tried to really bridge that divide because I think that fundamentally blockchain is an information security product and we should be treating it as such. And so hopefully I convince you it's not entirely stupid by the time we're done with this. And it's worthy of the position. So who am I? Right, okay. So we already covered that. I'm no longer with JP Morgan. I am currently unemployed. I have previously spoken at a variety of places. I was on CoinDesk's 10 most influential people in blockchain last year, and they did some really cool artwork that makes me look cooler than I am. So that's me. So let's get started. So these are two headlines recently. One from The Guardian, how blockchain could help us take back control of our privacy, post-Cambridge Analytica scandal. And over on the other side, MIT Technology Review, Bitcoin transactions aren't as anonymous as everyone hoped. So those are two relatively contradictory messages that are presented side by side in the media right now. And it's presenting a bit of cognitive dissonance. Are they both true? Maybe, not really with the way that the technology functions today. But you see a lot of hopes and dreams being placed on the back of blockchain technology. So just keep that in your mind as we go through this. So okay, show of hands, who here has at some point said or tweeted, why don't you just use a database in response to any sort of like crypto or blockchain things? All right, I see, that's like a dozen hands. That's like a reasonable percentage of the audience. Okay, that's okay. So usually you can. And sometimes you could just use a database, but there are these human reasons why centralized solutions have failed to gain traction. So an example of this might be in the financial world, what's called a trade registry. So if you are going to pledge assets to back some sort of financial transaction, what's called collateral, you would normally need to pledge these at some window where they write down that, it's a metaphorical window, but they write down what it is that you've put up as collateral. But you could take that same asset and pledge it at multiple windows, and now only in the event of a default, only one entity can actually repossess that asset because there's only one of it in the world. So historically, we've tried to have cross-jurisdictional global trade registries, and they just never work. Why? Because no one can agree on who the system administrators are, on which jurisdiction it sits in, on who would litigate in the event of a default, on who's the supreme owner. Right? So in those cases, using a decentralized system where different entities can actually be equal, you're no longer talking about peer-to-peer payments or even corporate-to-corporate payments, but you're now talking about sovereign jurisdiction to sovereign jurisdiction relationship management. And that's not just a technical problem, it's a human problem, but one that for the first time, blockchain technology is allowing us to attack in a new way. And so other times, we have created these centralized databases, but they're incredibly inefficient. They can be expensive, and sometimes they fail disastrously. So I'm sure we can all think of some centralized databases which contain a vast amount of personally identifiable information, which have been broken, let's use a nice word, in the last couple months or in the last year, right? So looking at the privacy solutions that are available for public blockchains today, I've heard people say, well, maybe if Equifax was on the blockchain, this wouldn't have happened. That is not accurate. That is not technically accurate. That is fundamentally inaccurate, right? The way that public blockchain functions today, everything is completely visible. Now, if we did actually have some sort of privacy solution where you could create silos so that your data stays with the original information owner, then maybe you would be getting somewhere. That infrastructure does not yet exist. We're currently designing it and building it, and hopefully that's the kind of thing that we could use your help on. So, blockchain, it's not just a database. You've probably seen there is no cloud, it's just someone else's computer. This is my contribution. There is no blockchain, it's just all of our computers. So it's not just a database, it's worse. It's slow to come to consensus. There may or may not be what's called settlement finality, which means that the current view of the world that we all agree on might suddenly disappear if there's some sort of forking activity on the network. The governance of the network is contentious. You can watch people scream on Twitter at each other about what should happen with, say, Bitcoin or Ethereum or Monero or Zcash governance. And any host of other kind of challenges. So the idea that large corporations should be moving their core ops onto a public blockchain in any sort of short term is deeply misguided. I would say that I know there's some people that say that within like the next 5 years, every company is going to have a public blockchain use case. And if that's like a www landing page, maybe. If that's like actually moving core operations, probably not. I mean, just because we started moving infrastructure into a cloud environment doesn't mean that we suddenly put everything on a public-facing web server. I mean, some companies might have, but maybe that wasn't the best idea. Okay, and yet. So we still see all of these ways that blockchain is going to apparently save the world, save freedom of speech, save healthcare, reduce inequality, the housing crisis, save humanity. So obviously panacea for all of society's ills. And this is why. So this is the first step in coming to understanding about the difference between people who talk about blockchain as a specific data structure and Merkle trees and cryptographic proofs, and people that talk about blockchain as a social good endeavor, right? It's not that one of these groups of people is right and one of these groups of people is wrong. It's simply that they're seeing the world through the lens of their own expertise. And in order to actually understand what blockchain technology could be, you really need to have a variety of expertises, and very few people cover the gamut, and that's why there are actually very few blockchain experts. I wouldn't call myself one at this point. I'm simply someone who happens to maybe touch a couple of these different areas, okay? So economics, I'm sure you're familiar with crypto economics at this point, and the incentivization model of mining pools in Bitcoin and other proof of work based systems. Distributed systems, so the way that we bring together the information that's crossing the network into one shared view of the world that everyone sees. You don't really see that in real time, but you see it within a soon enough time that it's still faster than sending an email, for example. But it's much slower than a centralized system like, say, Visa. Cryptography, so there's a whole variety of different kind of elliptic curve cryptography that underpins a variety of the different different blockchain processes. But in order to really get involved with blockchain or hashtag crypto, which in this case I guess means cryptocurrency and not cryptography, you don't need to be an applied cryptographer. I think that's something that keeps a lot of people out, is they think that they need to be like messing around down in like hash functions and like Diffie-Hellman stuff in order to make me like understand anything in a blockchain. And that's really not the case. In fact, almost any time that we've seen people try to make novel improvements, like rolling their own crypto, it does not go well. So not a problem, but if that is your area of expertise, it is deeply needed to have more people looking at the existing systems. So politics, we'll get to this in a second, but there's global push to look at how cryptocurrencies, my whole thing went away. Oh, it's probably I'm gonna have to touch the keyboard every like 5 minutes. This is a throwaway laptop, all right? Don't get concerned. I'm between laptops right now. There we go. Okay. So we can jump ahead. So politics, economics, cryptography, maybe just one sec, just to highlight something. So there's all of these like central banks are looking at what it would be like to have a digital version of their currency. In that case, most of them are talking about a digital representation of fiat cash. So something that would fall in line with their existing monetary policies and could be created and burned in line with various quantitative easing policies. Other countries are looking at creating a completely separate and independently fluctuating cryptocurrency, which would serve as a hedge against the fluctuation in their own currency. So if you've heard of the Venezuelan petro, that's an example there. So that could get pretty messy when you start talking about cryptocurrency not just being something like Bitcoin that's held in a peer-to-peer way, but actually being endorsed by governments. Then on top of that, you have national identity systems that people now want to put onto a blockchain. And the question becomes, who holds the private keys like that? In a system like that. So if you have a refugee population and they're crossing a border and their phone gets taken, who is the arbiter of their private key? And any government who says, well, don't worry, we'll just hold that for you, or any corporation who says that, you have to wonder what the recovery process is and what kind of impact that has on the overall kind of geopolitical structure that we have. What does citizenship mean when these things become malleable? And so at the center of all of these things, you end up with global banking and national security right next to each other, which is not really a coincidence. This is where a lot of the work that I was kind of doing at JP Morgan got really interesting, is macroeconomic stability. Provably secure elections, we might be having a problem with that in the US. And espionage. So what the heck does APT look like in this kind of a world? So when people talk about blockchain, they're coming at it from their own perspective, and we shouldn't be quite so dismissive depending on what lens they're using. So maybe try listening once in a while. You've probably heard the tale of everyone trying to feel the different parts of the elephant and only seeing the part that they understand. So businesses are experimenting along this spectrum, and it's not one thing or another. Very few businesses are trying to actually put things onto a public blockchain right now. Most that are, it's more of a press release kind of a thing and a public relations thing. Most are falling somewhere in between this, from distributed database through mutualized infrastructure. And what that means is that there's no such thing as the blockchain. Right? Even in the public space, there's many, many blockchains. But in the enterprise space, there's many blockchains and also more distributed ledgers. And a distributed ledger is similar to a blockchain, but it's meant to generally run in an instance where you have known participants, so they're not necessarily anonymous. It's generally accepted that you're going to have some sort of enterprise disaster recovery for your own data. There's probably going to be power 24 hours a day. Might be hosted on the cloud, actually. You know, it looks a lot more like traditional infrastructure that you're familiar with, but instead you're creating these distributed kind of networks with your counterparties and your peers, where you no longer have to constantly be reconciling information with each other. You can have a shared pool of primary records or golden source records. And that really would change the way that information security happens in these kinds of systems, right? It's kind of like the shift from purely on-premises infrastructure to cloud infrastructure. It didn't change everything overnight, and on-prem hosting has not gone away. But there certainly are plenty of jobs now that are cloud security experts, right? And also understanding the interface between on-premises and cloud-hosted solutions. I would imagine that in the future, you'll see something similar, that you simply have another option where people will choose that if they're working in this sort of a decentralized system, because maybe you want to share know your customer records, or maybe you want to share, I'll pick something non-financial, something like insurance records, right? That between the various actors in the supply chain of an insurance record. Wow, this is really going to turn off the setting. That you would actually do that in a distributed database. And it doesn't mean that all other infrastructure that you have goes away. There seems to be this push now that, like, if it's not entirely decentralized and your operations are decentralized and the governance is decentralized and the code coverage is decentralized, that it doesn't count. And we really need to kind of get past that thinking, because it's probably very unlikely to happen. So the trade-off that you have is choose two. So flexible, resilient, and performant networks. You have confidential, secure, kind of data privacy networks, and you have accessible networks. So if you were to choose something that is open and accessible, but flexible, resilient, and performant, that probably mostly right now looks like Bitcoin. I know you can argue whether or not it's highly performant, but it certainly is resilient and it is open. It does not really have a concept of data privacy at all. It's completely transparent. The anonymity there is also highly questionable. If you wanted something that is open but supports data privacy, you might have something that looks like Zcash. But Zcash does not support smart contracts in the same way that something like Ethereum might. And also, it's relatively slow to generate these special zero-knowledge proofs and the ZK snarks that underpin the Zcash system. And finally, if you want something that's resilient, performant, flexible, confidential, and secure, that's great, but you own it. It is your database. It is not open. So these are the challenges that businesses are having in trying to figure out what the infrastructure of the future should look like, and it's just not decided yet. There's multiple competing architectures from IBM, Intel, well, JP Morgan, we open sourced a version of Ethereum, but also from other consortia and startups. There's many proprietary ledgers, like the protocol just doesn't exist. Right now, it's like having CompuServe and Prodigy and AOL, and you can't even send an email between the three. It's a nightmare. And that's why this stuff isn't all in production yet. And that's probably okay, because anybody who invests 20 million in moving large-scale infrastructure onto one of these things as it is right now is probably going to regret it in 18 months. The code is evolving so fast that the code base that we have today is dramatically different than it was even a year ago. So the businesses are concerned about data privacy, compliance, obviously GDPR now coming up, but also there's lots of other kinds of compliance, governance of the network, who's in charge, dispute resolution, who do you call when something goes wrong, the performance. If you look at something like Bitcoin or Ethereum, they handle between, say, 7 and dozens of transactions a second. If you look at something like Visa, you're talking about tens of thousands of transactions a second. So if you want to start doing global scale operations on a blockchain, you're probably not doing it with proof of work as it exists today. And then settlement finality, if you tell a corporate treasurer that there's like 98% probability something definitely happened, they just don't like that. So being sure that you aren't going to have some sort of forking in the future, and resilience, making sure that our existing kind of enterprise standards, 6.9, Sigma, whatever, that the system uptime is there. So what have we ended up with? Well, we've ended up with isolated networks. This is the current state of the world. So you have these public networks, and I've done a really good job of finding character icons here. So here we have, you got a hacker in a hoodie, right? So that's who's on the Bitcoin blockchain. You've got a terrorist with a gun. This is an angry person screaming about governance on Twitter. And these are Bitcoin bros sitting on their pile of Bitcoin investment earnings, which are now 70% less than they were, I guess, in January, for what it's worth. But so this is common perception of what's happening on the public network, and that's why there's not a lot of business engagement there. Enterprise networks, on the other hand, it's just like, it's supply chain, it's factories, you've got some sort of IoT thing happening in that factory up there, that warehouse, you have banks, it's all kind of faceless, there's no interoperability, no one knows what's going on, and the twain shall never meet, right? And that's a problem. That's a problem because it's become this proxy war for the people and the proletariat versus business as usual. And at a technical level, it's not that. It's a trade-off on the triangle between what do you care about? If you care about open, anonymous, censorship-resistant payments, you end up with some system that looks like Bitcoin. It's not because you actually hate enterprise disaster recovery, right? So we've shifted the technical principles onto the social principles, and now we have this kind of like proxy war that really isn't fair to either sides. So the security risk level of each of these things, I was kind of being unkind here, but the security risk level of public networks right now is basically schadenfreude, right? Like it's not probably your money, so it's really just funny when these hacks occur, because also there's just so much like, oh, why'd you do it like that? I'm sure there were two great smart contract security talks here. Both of them kind of reviewed a lot of the oopsies that have happened in Ethereum over the last year. So it's fun to play along with when it's not your money. And the security risk level of the enterprise systems, if we're just going towards this distributed ledger thing that's not particularly anti-fragile, not particularly open, there's no concept of cryptocurrency, it's going to be mostly like today. But what could it look like? What is probably more pragmatically likely? I think that we're probably going to end up with something that looks a lot more like this. So this kind of hybrid situation where network boundaries form themselves around where the information primacy is. So where whoever owns that record, that its original source. That's the entire point of a blockchain, right? Is you're supposed to have provenance back to the source of the data. So if individuals generate our own data, we should be the owners of that kind of data. If you generate that data in conjunction with a business, maybe they end up with having co-rights to it, that's fine. But businesses generate their own records. You have Internet of Things here at the top, which is spamming the network with its own kind of information. So you've got public networks of lots of different types of people that are just basically like using the internet. Right? It's connecting to the information that resides where you need it to be, right? Rather than creating a central database, it simply exists where it is in the world. However, you get all of these kind of pods of different groups that have some collective incentive to act together. So maybe some sort of national chain or network that does facilitate voting. Do you really think that like national voting is going to be done on a globally DOSable network? Probably not, right? So if that plugs in with some sort of identity system, whether it's a national identity or your self-sovereign identity or what have you, you would want to connect those things together. So if you have supply chains, that's probably an international thing. Supply chains, most of our goods cross national borders to get to us. But there's only, I think at this point, there's something like 12,000 nodes on the Bitcoin network. It's not actually very many. A lot of people think it's like millions and millions. But there might be tens of thousands or even millions of actors in a specific supply chain. If you think about Walmart or Alibaba, I mean, you're talking about millions of participants, or Amazon's logistic operations, right? So at what point does a sufficiently adopted, permissioned blockchain start to inherit the security properties of a public chain? It actually gets a lot messier than people are accounting for right now. And then you got, banking stuff happening up there. And maybe you do want to have like your private peer-to-peer. I don't know, maybe that's Mastodon. I don't know what that is. But it's something that just doesn't connect to the rest of it. You can do that if you want. It's probably more pragmatic. So, so the security risk now, we've basically created an entire intertangled global system where really no one is in charge and who the hell knows what's going on from a boundary standpoint. You might be able to control some of these things, but once you're crossing over to the public networks, there is just no threat model on this yet. Nobody knows. Because right now, people aren't even to the point of thinking that this is something that makes sense to do. They still think public networks bad, enterprise networks good, or depending if you sit on the other side of the room, the other way around. So let's go back for a second and mull over the headlines as I grab a drink of water here. So far, does it seem like blockchain is going to help us take back control of our privacy? Probably not. Well, it depends. It really depends if that kind of hybrid network supports privacy in various places and clusters. Privacy isn't something that you can tack on to a system after the fact. It's not opt out, or it's not something that you can decide after the fact, oh, I'd really like to put that genie back in the bottle. You need to start with something that is private and secure and strongly encrypted up front, and then perhaps selectively disclose as you go. That might work, but it's going to require so much more granular understanding of data management, that probably the people in this room are the most qualified people to be able to do that. But if you look at regular humans and then you tell them, congratulations, you own your own data, I mean, it possibly could end up being actually worse than it is now. So the future is coming. What is it going to look like? So are we going to have kind of like, this is the sky drone war, of course, and this is the friendly robot that's not trying to kill you, that you know of? So we're building these architectures now. Like, they just don't exist. There are examples of public blockchains, and they're, we all got very excited when the asset value across a variety of public blockchains hit a couple $100 trillion last year, but that is just infinitesimal in the scope of global economics, let alone global internet traffic. If we really think that we're rebuilding this internet of value, it's a next generation internet where you can support different kinds of markets and different microeconomies. And we aren't actually thinking upfront about what the security and privacy of these systems is going to be for everyone, not just for people that understand private key management via a text pad. We're going to have problems. So, is the GIF going to work? Oh, the GIF works, right? Okay, so blockchain plus IoT plus AI, right? So this is not a thing. So just forget that. You don't have to worry about that. That is not a thing. Here's what is a thing. So of the countries that have actually released their own cryptocurrency, these are the three. China, Russia, and Venezuela are working on actual cryptocurrency projects, right? And not exact, like Venezuela is actually a cryptocurrency that you're mining. The NEO project is more like an Ethereum version with smart contracts, but it does have state funding. And Russia's version of Ethereum is called Masterchain. Now, Masterchain also recently took the platform that we created at JP Morgan called Quorum. And, well, actually, they might not have done this yet. It might be on the drawing board. But there were plans here, and they have demonstrated on public Ethereum to make the crypto interface there pluggable to put in a different suite of crypto, right? So the Russian Ghost protocols. So and then they asked us if you could basically do the same thing with Quorum. And what you can see is that maybe these different kind of hybrid networks that we were talking about 5 minutes ago, where everyone is part of a happy global citizen commune here, actually ends up looking a lot more like a fractured geopolitical boundary kind of next generation splinter net that we have today, and that we kind of take for granted a lot of the time that the internet as we know it was mostly developed in the West. So because of the regulatory burden to work on public blockchain systems in most of US and Europe, there's a huge brain drain, and there's a lot more investment in these projects in other places. So having state-backed projects elsewhere around the world simply means that other places are getting there first. And we have to be aware of what impact that might have on what the global kind of geopolitical cyber landscape looks like going forward. So I know I said previously that enterprise blockchains look like AOL and CompuServe and Prodigy, but it's the same thing when you talk about different cryptographic suites that underlie these different blockchains. They don't talk to each other. And you can't just bridge that with an API. It's a much more fundamental problem. So are we going to just be reinforcing these existing kind of communities or national lines that we have in the future? And if countries go into places that are developing countries right now and say, don't worry, we'll help you build your national ID infrastructure, we'll help you build your banking system, we'll give you the free technology, does that end up isolating them rather than bringing them into the global economy, depending on who gets there first? So there's a massive kind of land grab to pay attention to. So public blockchains essentially are world-readable data lakes. That's not great. And increasingly, the anonymity of a part of that blockchain network depends on the motivations and operational security actions of the whole. That's not good. That means that at the height of the market upswing towards the end of last year, Coinbase was opening 300,000 accounts a day. It was the top downloaded app on iOS in the Apple App Store. And all of those people plan on paying their taxes. All of those people are okay being KYC'd. Most of them want to transfer money from their bank account, which is also KYC'd. And so depending on what other people are doing on the network and which wallets get disclosed and who's okay disclosing that, because they're not there for private censorship-resistant payments, they're there because the market's going up, you end up with different kind of clusters de-anonymized. And Bitcoin specifically has a fungibility problem in that it's much easier to track specific coins in the various wallets that they've hopped through. So if you watched, for example, the WannaCry ransomware attacks last year, you could look In the malware, you could see the actual address that coins were supposed to be deposited to. You could pull it up on a blockchain explorer, and you could watch the funds going into the wallet. It was actually not that, nearly as much as one would have expected. It was like $30,000 or something. But those coins, those outputs for the rest of all time are tainted in that you know that at one point they were involved in that transaction. So that's where currencies like Monero or Zcash or some of the other privacy coins have tried to step in and restore that fungibility. But you still end up with, as it is right now, there's companies like Chainalysis and like Elliptic that do both assist law enforcement, but also assist a variety of other data analysis companies in de-anonymizing the public blockchain ecosystem. So if you what we were working on with the Quorum project, or our Ethereum fork at JP Morgan, was having known participants with confidential transactions. So you know who else is in the network, and everybody has a public key. You might not know, I guess, who owns that public key in some iterations of it, but in general, you know who owns the key. But all of the data, all of the smart contracts that go around the network, all of the assets that settle, all of that was confidential. In the public system, you have the opposite. You have anonymous or pseudonymous actors with completely visible transaction history. Well, once you de-anonymize a variety of the participants, you have known actors with known transaction history, and now you have Twitter for your bank account. And now you have a larger data lake that is world readable to any government on the face of the planet that wants to pay attention to what's going on. So sometimes I say the only reason that people think that Bitcoin is private is because previously no one was looking. So businesses need privacy. And now we're shifting from the dystopian view over to the, but it could be better view, right? Come along with me on that journey. So businesses need privacy. They care about this. For the first time, I got to talk to people in like C-suite positions of amazing companies with names you would definitely recognize, and talk to them about strong encryption and why it matters. And it wasn't like a crazy CISO rant, but it was about protecting fundamental business processes. And it's not so much that people have ever been against this, it's a lot of times they just didn't know. And so you see a lot of business interest in blockchain, but that's really because to them, through their lens, blockchain, they don't understand the whole kind of schema, what is it, but they've heard something about data privacy, something about encryption. They care about that. They care about not being breached. They care about not having vulnerable code out in the wild. Can a blockchain help you with that? No, but they know that something is there that they need to be paying attention to. And I think it's the first time that, or we at least have this opportunity to open that dialogue in a way where we say, the way that we've been doing this previously hasn't really been successful, and we see we have to throw more and more bodies and more, I don't know, AI and whatever we're throwing at threat detection these days, to try to secure the perimeter. But the way that blockchain and distributed ledger works, it's a different model of security. It's integrated throughout the stack, and something like Bitcoin becomes more secure the more participants you have, the more people you add to the network. It's no longer based on keeping people out, which we know that perimeter security model has failed. So they are listening, but we have to figure out a way to make that still work within the auspices of compliance and governance. And what happens when this runs up against something like requests to make secure enclaves less secure for certain entities, right? It's just going to happen again. So businesses need privacy. Oh, okay. I put this in here as an aside. So this is Peter van Valkenburg, who's the director of research at Coin Center that does a lot of lobbying for open blockchains. And he was testifying to the House Energy and Commerce Committee and said, one of the particularly interesting partnerships to highlight is between Ethereum, Zcash, and the innovators at JP Morgan. So I just thought that was like a highlight of my career to be in the congressional testimony. And also, so this is the partnership between JP Morgan and Zcash. So I don't know, a lot of you probably know Zuko. So that's Zuko from Zcash, and he's a carnivore who only eats meat, and that's me eating a lot of lettuce and him being horrified. And then over on this side, so the Zcash company, or the Zcash Foundation, their nonprofit side, was just doing so they use what's called ZK snarks to underpin the Zcash cryptocurrency. And those snarks, it's a circuit, it's this whole thing we're not going to get into now. But you might have heard of the trusted setup that underpin Zcash. And so they're trying to move to a different system in which you would only need to have had one honest actor in the entire initial setup. And so they ran this new party, a new secure multi-party compute thing that was called Powers of Tau. This was my contribution. I got to go around and like generate a bunch of entropy and then set computers on fire. It was super awesome. So that's the partnership with Zcash. Anyway, back to important things. Okay, so businesses need privacy, established. Real people do too. So imagine if enterprises were actually to adopt and want to use these sort of privacy supporting systems, then we would probably have access to them as well. And now if you actually were to own your data and perhaps say have it on a keychain with you, and don't worry, if you lose your phone, you can actually recover your keys through a variety kind of secret sharing process. It's okay. We've handled that problem before. But you can now say move records between doctors. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to get x-rays to a new doctor, but it's a nightmare. You could prevent diploma fraud. You could take a signed copy of your diploma with you for the rest of your life, even if that accredited institution went out of business. You can prove your credentials in your credit history when you move countries, whether you wanted to move countries or not, right? So that would be an immense change in power. Now, could a lot of people actually manage all that themselves? Well, given the trade-off between security and convenience, people have always chosen convenience, right? So in order to get to that world, if you think that is something that sounds good, we need not just people who are super great at security, but people who really care about building usable systems, like usability. We all know that's probably like the worst part of getting most people in the rest of our lives to use any of the tools that already exist. It's just not easy. So we need more and more usability experts to partner with people in information security to build things that actually work and will actually be used. Now, I guess that's been a problem for the last 20 years, but we have a new chance. We could do it. Okay, so let's say that you own your own data. Now you might have the opportunity to monetize your data. So if you actually own that data, and when you, say, participated in some sort of study, you didn't just send your data off into the ether, but rather perhaps either you send it in some sort of encrypted package that would have some sort of attestation that you were going to be paid for that usage, and then you could verify that it had been removed from someone else's server. Or more interestingly, if you see what's happening with a lot of like the Intel SGX and like secure enclave local compute stuff, you could start doing something where if you were to participate in a medical study, they could actually send their algorithm to you. Rather than sending the data to the compute, you can kind of send the compute to the data. That can all happen inside a secure hardware chip and then actually transmit just the information back, possibly even anonymously, along with some token that allows you to be paid for it. So it's not DRM as we've known it in the past, but it would allow people to actually license in a provable way their data, or to actually just never have your data leave your own premises. And so I think in the security convenience trade-off, it's been this losing battle forever and ever, and I think convenience and usability is incredibly important. But I do think that there is an opportunity, especially with, and I'm going to use the word millennials, but with people who are used to the sharing economy, with people who are now part of the gig economy, with people who have a Patron or who monetize their Instagram, they're used to monetizing their data, and this isn't actually so far-fetched for them. So if usable tools existed, it's entirely possible that people would get over the hump of the initial convenience into thinking, wow, how could I actually market and run an entire business off of my data? So if you look at a company like Facebook, whose cost of operations right now from that data acquisition is essentially zero, it goes to literally anything that is not zero, and that's a very different operating model for all of those companies that run off of our data. So this is a graphic from Indie. I've used it before, but I like the concept here, right? So they are proponents of ethical design. And ethical design at its base, they say, supports human rights. It's decentralized, private, open, interoperable, accessible, secure, and sustainable. And those all seem like wonderful things, but a lot of that also sounds like a blockchain. So I think having that kind of decentralized system at its core gives us an opportunity to build a new kind of application stack that takes into account the humans that are using these systems more so than the current kind of client-server thing that we've had in the past. So it's also respectful of human effort, it's usable, and at the top, it's delightful. So that's the convenience thing that we're talking about. And all of that is about respect in design. So we've run the gamut here between this is going to be about like geopolitical encryption wars, to this is about being able to monetize your own data, to this is about building systems that support human rights, right? And this is the problem with blockchain, is you could talk about any one of those things for an hour or more to a specific group of people, and they would feel like, oh, that's something I would like to get involved with. But really, it's all of those things. And right now, if you look at the architectures that truly exist, it's none of those things. It doesn't do any of those things. But the opportunity is there if we were to actually put forth the right kind of effort and get the right experts and the right people that want to be involved, and possibly launching fewer ICOs and spending more time building actual systems. But this is possibly, the utopian robot that is friends with you option of the future. So one more time. Okay, so where have we gotten to at this point? So could blockchain help us take back control of our privacy? Maybe it actually could. Now, Cambridge Analytica is apparently like the scapegoat for this whole thing, but they're just one of many, many companies that are just functioning as designed. I mean, that's Facebook's business model. This was not a data breach, right? So, and there's an entire industry that will probably fight back if this model kind of comes to fruition. So we would need to understand and be prepared for that in the same way that people that think that central banks might lose power to these peer-to-peer currencies, if we really were to come to a point where there's some sort of global citizenry and everyone owns their data and it's like this massive crypto utopia paradise, like that is not going to happen overnight. That is like bloody revolution. So, and I'm not necessarily advocating for that either. I'm saying that we need to understand that you can't just get from point A to point Z without going through many, many growing pains in the interim. And maybe some of that, if you're familiar with another push right now is for ISPs to expand compute power at the ISP such that you actually no longer need to do computation on your cell phone or on your local device, right? So first we had cloud storage, now we're gonna have like cloud compute. So you don't even need to be running your own, I don't know, what's that game? Like Bejeweled or whatever it is people play. Like you don't even need to do that. You'd be running it literally on your ISP server and they'll let you know what happened. That is exactly the opposite of this kind of thing. Well, who has more money? Like a bunch of people who don't know what's going on and that this could work for them, or the telco industry? So there's definitely interesting, like we thought net neutrality was going to be a problem. This is a much larger challenge. So smart contracts testing is maturing. To talk about security a little bit specifically here. So there were 2 talks here. I've seen a variety of others at different conferences. They're almost always about like flaws in Ethereum. I think it's great that we're teaching people that might be writing code, especially in Solidity, which is a relatively laughably bad language, that not to make these common mistakes. So there's a bunch of analysis tools right now. There's auditing services. So if you are going to be ICOing or launching something on the public blockchain, definitely you should be using them. This is not a comprehensive list. So that's kind of existing. But it's down in the weeds. We're talking to the doers. We're talking to the people that have their hands on keyboards. But somewhere above that, there's nothing. So in the enterprise data space, there's no identity and access management system for enterprise blockchains. There's no credible plugs into an LDAP system, despite putting that on various roadmaps like 2 years ago. Like it is a lot harder than it seems. There's a perception that secure hardware like SGX is going to be a panacea and can provide privacy in ways that it simply can't. There's not a lot of focus on a defense in depth model, and a lot of the choices architecturally that are being made are somewhat naive at this point. There's no way to run these shared governance mutualized infrastructure systems, like let alone have the lawyers agree on how it should function. There's no way to actually implement that governance model yet. And some people they're making strides on this, and there's a whole lot of press releases that say that people are doing it. But like I've seen these things, and it looks like Microsoft management tools in the 90s. Like it is not ready. How do you handle this when it's actually running in the cloud? If your entire blockchain runs on the same cloud, is it actually decentralized? How do you integrate these into your existing risk management processes or your existing static scanning tools? There's not, say, like Solidity suites for Nessus yet, or I just showed you some of those other tools, but a lot of those tools, they're not used as like core enterprise processes. So there's a disconnect in the maturity of the tools that are available versus the maturity of tools that would be used. The veracity of data oracles. So if you want to pull in any data to a distributed system from some other place, it's considered an oracle, right? That just means like data that came from some deus ex machina, like literally you have no idea if it's true. So adding veracity and attestation to that is an active source of research. So that's probably coming along, but it's not widely distributed. Patch management, who knows? Usable privacy, also a challenge. And then in the public space, we continue to see hacked exchanges, compromised hardware, wallet compromises, fake donation scams. There's somebody impersonating me on Twitter, for what it's worth, trying to get you to send them Ether. An actual 51% attack just happened against, I think it was like Verge or something like last week, so it's really happening. Non-mining consensus, so are we going to move away from proof of work to something like proof of stake or any of these other consensus mechanisms? And when you do that, how long do they run in production before we think they're actually secure? People, like I said, rolling their own crypto, faux decentralization. So there's a lot of projects that say that they're decentralized, but it turns out they actually run the majority of their own servers. Patch management and privacy, universal problem. So none of this is solved. If you want to actually do like greenfield kind of projects, there's people working on all of them. But there is just so much room for not just thought leadership, but like actual work. There's so many conference talks that could come out of this too. So I would love to see not just more talks on smart contract security, but on threat modeling these networks, on integration into existing risk management systems, on what an overall kind of network topology would look like between three corporates and their clientele, right? Like nobody's done that yet. But there is hope. So for the first time, we have this union, not just of business incentives around appreciating privacy and regulatory pressure with things like GDPR, the human sentiment of people that are just really pissed off about how their data is being used and they don't like it. National defense starting to realize that there could be a lot of cryptographic security, or a lot of security to be gained from a more kind of comprehensive and distributed system, and the technical capabilities that actually evolved from this blockchain thing existing for the first time. So sometimes people just don't quite understand the difference when somebody says Internet of Value and Internet of Information. So just to give it to you quickly, right? The Internet of Information that we have known for the last 40 years is great when you want to send something like an email or a picture. Like I send it to my mom and now I have a picture and she has a picture and we're both happy. But it is really, really terrible when you want to send something and then just provably not have it anymore. Whether that is a dollar or a vote or intellectual property rights or a land title or a crypto kitty. And so this is the first time that you can actually trade digital bearer assets. And it doesn't have to be financial assets. When you say assets, people think financial, but it doesn't have to be. This is the first time that you can create those kind of transactions in microeconomies. And that really is a huge game changer to have come together with all the rest of these things. So imagine sovereign to sovereign payments, government to government, they pay each other all the time. There's concerns right now about various countries trying to evade capital controls by using cryptocurrency to pay each other because it's relatively anonymous, right? So there's concern up and down the chain, but there's really concern all over the place about how this kind of technology, once it's out of the bottle, people are going to build with it. They're going to use it. We just don't know exactly what it's going to end up looking like. And if we're not making the right choices now that involve people who understand national defense, but also who understand, social good and what banking the unbanked means, or unbanking the banked, depending on your opinions, then you're going to end up with very different looking systems. And it has, large economic and human impacts later on. So finally, we need you. And I really just brainstormed this list of things in like 5 minutes, so don't hold me to it. But people say like, well, where do I fit into this? Do you actually need my skill set, or do I just like wait until there's some job description? But we need more people to be involved, whether you're doing intrusion detection, red team, blue team, pen testing, threat modeling, C-suite, applied crypto people, NOC operations, cloud security, whatever. All of those things should exist in an actual production blockchain or decentralized system. The idea that they don't is concerning, right? The same as like app dev, QA, like God forbid we actually test our code. DevOps, usability, business analysts, project managers, political scientists in economics, in defense. Like, in order to make a functioning ecosystem, you need to have a variety of roles. And so it's not just for crypto bros. And I speak a lot about like diversity and inclusion because I get asked to do all these like women in tech things, but inclusion is a lot more than simply like race, gender, and sexuality. Inclusion is the fact that we all have these different skill sets, and when we only get people that think about the world in a specific way, you end up solving problems in one specific way. So one of the coolest things happening right now is the diversity of approaches to solving problems like scaling, for example, or formal verification. There's projects that are based on row calculus for verification. There's 2 competing implementations of proof of stake just on the Ethereum blockchain. Like, there are so many smart people that are involved in this space, but we need to have more people that aren't turned on by it just because they were like blockchain people. We need people that are bringing other expertise into it. And that hopefully is you. So the choice, where do we go from here? Cyber dystopia, some sort of magic robot space. That's it. I have my Twitter handle down there, so be sure to tag me on anything you want to say. And I think I have a couple minutes if anybody wants to ask any questions about anything. And thank you.
No questions from the floor?
We'll give it a second. There's got to be somebody with a question. Really? Everybody agrees with everything I said? Wow, I'm awesome. Okay.
Thank you very much, Amber Baldet, for a
Thanks.
fantastic keynote to wrap up this year's conference.